want to thank everybody for taking time out from your weekend to come in to our open house on the Chapman Creek Source Assessment Response Plan. I'm Brian Shuichi. I'm the General Manager of the Infrastructure Services Department with the SARP. And as you're probably aware, this is one of two open houses for you today. We're actually going to repeat the same thing at the Gibson's Area Community Center at 2 o'clock. And I think you've all had a chance to take a look at the boards. And we have Don Robson, who's with Urban Systems, who's our prime consultant, has helped us with the technical working group and developing the draft report that is up on our website. And he's going to do a quick presentation here, going over the process and the results. And I also want to make a note that we are videotaping this presentation so that we can put it up on our website for people that weren't able to make it. And so if you do have any concerns with your face or body being on the video that's going to be put on the website, we just ask that you move over this way because the camera's right back there and going to be shooting this direction. So I'll hand it over to Don Dobson.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Good morning. Thank you all for taking a Saturday morning and coming in and finding out a little bit more about what we've been working on with regards to the response plan to improve the long-term protection of your drinking water in the What I'd like to do this morning is I'll run through a few slides here just to give you an overview of the process, what we went through, how we arrived at the plan that the storyboards have summarized behind us, and then give you a chance to ask any questions, and I'll do my best to try to answer them. So if we look at the process that we've been involved in here, and I apologize for all the acronyms. This thing is full of acronyms. SARP, as you're probably aware, stands for Source Assessment Response Plan, and this is the second part of a process that has been put in place as a result of the implementation of the Drinking Water Protection Act that came in 2003. The first part of that is an assessment of the watershed. This was done in 2006. The Vancouver Coastal Health Authority directed the regional district to undertake an assessment of the watershed, what the risks, hazards, and risks are to drinking water in the Chapman Creek watershed, and that was completed in 2006. Then in 2011, the Vancouver Coastal Health asked the regional district to now move on to the second part of that, and that is, now that we've identified what are the hazards and risks of drinking water in the Chapman Creek watershed, how do we respond to those risks? And so our job, when we were retained by the regional district, was to start with the assessment plan report that was done in 2006, which identified a series of hazards and risks, and as the basis for moving forward with a response plan. So the first thing that we did was take last summer was take that assessment report and the risks and hazards that were identified, and to confirm in the watershed by going out in the watershed and whether they really did still exist or not. So some of them were in regards to sedimentation off roads, and some of it was in regards to activities on private land, and some of it was in regards to risks associated with what happens with intense rainstorms and what might be the shift in hazard with climate change, and sort of broad landscape-based ones, as opposed to some of them which were very site-specific. So what we did was we went out on the ground and covered the watershed using the various access routes and so forth. at the sites that were identified in that report, and anything new that we might find that might have occurred, because we're not 5 years down the road from when that plan was done. And so we did that, updated the list, and then the intent was to move that forward with regards to putting in a ranking of, in 2011, of these risks from high to low, and then identifying what would be an idea with regards to how should that risk be responded to. Part of what we had to do was, as some of you will know, the regional district has limited authority on the ground in the watershed, particularly on Crown land. Crown land, which the majority of the watershed is Crown land, is a multiple use, deemed for multiple use by the province. So I'll use terms that I hope that are somewhat familiar to you, easier than some of the current names that we've got for ministries out there. But for example, forestry on Crown land is looked after by the Forest Service, and recreation is looked after by tourism to a certain degree, although there's a whole lot of unmanaged recreation that occurs out there, as many of you know. And then we've got the park in the upper part of the watershed, which is looked after by the Parks Branch, and water is looked after by what was the former Ministry of Environment, and so on and so forth. So there's a multiple agency approach to this, and the only way we get anything done out here is through collaboration. So what the regional district did in response to the direction from Vancouver Coastal Health to move forward with this response plan was they formed a technical working group, and that involved government agencies, the private landowner in the watershed, and representatives from the forest licensee and so forth. And so there was this technical working group that we worked with, because the whole intent is, as we identified risks, the only way we're going to get something done, we have to identify who. We started off by identifying who is the agency on the Crown land that is responsible for that, and let's say it is with regards to logging and the current forest licensee that holds a forest license in the watershed, who is administered by the Forest Service. And so we would identify that if there was an issue with regards to a logging road, the classification of that logging road, that it was under the ministry, under the Forest Service, and then possibly it was the forest licensee. We had to work out what that flow path was in order to get something done, and attach responsibility to it, because the regional district has very limited responsibilities out there and authority to do anything. They have the responsibility to deliver safe drinking water to everyone, but they have very little authority by which to manage the watershed. In addition to that, there is also an agreement between, as you're probably aware, there's an agreement in place between the regional district and the Seashell Indian Band for cooperative management of the watershed. And there's a move being taken, initiative being taken by those two groups to petition the province to remove from provincial control to joint management between the regional district and the Seashell Indian Band. But that's not in effect yet. What is in effect is it is still Crown land, it is managed by the province. But we recognize in the report, and if you read the report, you'll see references to this joint management that could occur in the future, and that could change things on the management, how the land is managed out there. The Seashell Indian Band has identified a series of principles for how they want that traditional territory now, the status quo is it's Crown land or private land, where it's Crown land. So there was, as I indicated, there was the report that we started with was the assessment report that was done in 2006. There was other reports that have been done here that we also looked at as part of the work that we were doing as references. There's been a considerable amount of interest and a considerable amount of work done in this watershed over the years. It was very useful reference materials. So don't try to read what's on there. The whole intent is what you're seeing up here is reflected on the storyboards back there. So what we did was we took the risks out of the assessment report, confirmed whether they were still a risk, and if the level of risk was still the same as what was identified in that report. And we started off by identifying what the original risks were and the risk rating was, and then we moved forward as to has that risk rating changed? What's the 2011 risk rating? And then more details on it, and characterize the risks from very high to low. And then we also produced, the working group asked if we could produce a risk map of the watershed, which you will see on one of the story panels at the back. And the intent of this is that it is to help anyone who would be doing anything on the land out there, anything from if it was a trail strategy where walking trails and hiking trails or biking trails may go to forest development, etc., to be aware of the level of risk. And by and large, the way that these risk zones with the highest risk closest to the creek and the moderate risk and then the low risk, the way that those were defined is basically how connected is the landscape to the creek. And if you were to drop a marble on that slope, how quickly would that marble run down the slope and end up in the intake? And so if it was fast, it was a high risk. If it was sort of moderately fast, but you had some time to react to it, it was a moderate risk. And if you dropped a marble on the ground and just sort of sat there, then that was a low risk. So it's about if particularly sediment wise, because sediment is one of the biggest issues that we have with impacting drinking water, because what it does is it compromises the disinfection process and it increases the cost of running the water treatment plant and so forth. So by and large, if we can keep sediment out of the anthropogenic sources of sediment out of the water, the better off we are. There's always some kind of a natural load. There always will be, always has been. But we're trying to reduce and control the anthropogenic impacts on the earth. That's about this. Well, you know, you can go out, somebody can go out and say, you know, I've stood right there, and I don't think that's a moderate risk. And that may very well be the case. This is just a characterization to get your attention to think about it. So it is based on great detailed terrain mapping and so on and so forth. So just a bit of caution on that. So the risk tables, which are back there, the risk map that we just talked about, and keep going. So we identified 14 of the 23 hazards out there were high and moderate risk, and we came up with 70 action recommendations that fit into the response plan table. And this is the response plan table. So it starts off with sediment that I was just talking about, for example. It talks about a series of best management practices. These exist in a whole variety of areas with regards to land management and land users out there are, in most cases, they know what these are already, and it's just a reiteration of what those best management practices are. And in a ranking, a time frame, whether it is short, moderate, or medium or long term, with regards to the taking that action, and then that responsibility. And you can see the SCRD shows up in a lot of the items there. And I caution you, the reason that the SCRD is identified there is because they are the group that needs to initiate the action. So if there's something going on with regards to, say, the Ministry of Energy Mines, with regards to perhaps development of an aggregate source that might be above the intake, it behooves the regional district to initiate that conversation with Energy Mines with regards to what are you planning here? Are you aware of our report? Can we have a discussion here about what's going on? And so no surprises, and maybe head off some of these things that become really controversial down the road. So just because there's the SCRD, if you're an accountant and you start counting all of the number of times the SCRD shows up there, in many cases this is actions that the Brian and Monty and staff need to just initiate with the board, initiate those discussions to get other agencies motivated to do something. So that's where that comes from. And then we put in a cost estimate of what in our judgment it would take in order to provide to Brian and to the board an understanding of what's the magnitude of the immediate, which is a short term, medium term, and long term. We broke it into 5 different categories, ranging from actually moving dirt on the ground, infrastructure improvements, to management practices, education, and so forth. So you can see it's broken out as a percentage there, just to give you an idea of the distribution of effort that needs to go into the various actions. A very, very preliminary estimate is it's about $500,000 worth of things that need to be done out there by all parties. And it's, there's probably 90 to 100 man-days of person days worth of work on the ground and in getting things done. And in addition, there are 22 of those actions where we didn't attach either a dollar or a time, simply because these are, some of them are global, some of them are like with climate change. It's pretty tough to attach either a time or a dollar to that, but it's something that needs to be aware of with regards to, say, shifting in precipitation patterns, and how might that affect the long-term supply in the watershed, and is there going to be sufficient water in the future to actually meet the community's needs, say 20 years down the road. They need to be thinking about that now, be aware of that, and we have to attach a dollar value to them. So with that, my monologue is finished. And any questions? Yes?
I think it was in summertime with the water flow going low, and then still the increased demand with the summer people that come up here. Is there any plans in terms of a future reservoir system that may help balance the consumption?
Can you restate the question so the camera picks it up more?
Sure. The question was with regards to the lower summer flows and increasing demand, particularly as we have an itinerant population that may come during the summer. Is there a plan to increase reservoir storage, to increase the availability of water and avoid shortages? Brian, do you want to comment on that?
You'll probably see one of the reference documents that was up on that one slide. There was said a comprehensive regional water plan, and right now it's under development. And one of the aspects that we're looking at a 25-year planning horizon to identify 10-year budgetary actions. And one of the key ones there is long-term supply. And so that's being reviewed right now. It's not the immediate pressing issue. We do have quite adequate supply right now. We're looking for at least another 15 years. Even with summer, our pressing issue right now is treatment. It's summer treatment. We can't keep up with demands through a treatment plant. So that is something that we're actually looking at budgeting for in the next year or two, is to expand that treatment plant. But and through this year, we're hoping to have the comprehensive regional water plan done. We have a draft strategy right now that hasn't gone to the board yet. So once that becomes goes to the board, we're hoping to roll that out to through forums like this, and it will look at long-term supply, immediate infrastructure requirements, demand management versus supply side management. Those are the questions. So sorry, I don't have an exact answer for you right now, but we're working on it.
Other questions? Don't tell me I was so succinct in what I said. You understand it. Yes.
Just wanted to raise the question of how much does this plan hold legal authority to do some of the things that are laid out in it? That was one of the questions that had come up as a technical working group.
Sure.
I just wondered if it could be looked upon as a lot of costs that the SRD could take on, but in the end, you know, if we're going to the Ministry of Forest or to some other, are they required to deal with some of the risks, because they might not be deemed risky enough, like
Right.
they might not be high enough priority to be a health hazard, but they might be a management issue.
Right. So the question, just if I could repeat it just for the video. So the question is what legal weight does this plan carry with it to actually get things done that are recommended in the plan? And Tim may want to comment on this if he chooses. But basically, what's happening here is Vancouver Coastal Health wrote to the regional district and said, we want you to complete this plan, and we want a timeline for it to be completed, and it needs to be submitted to the drinking water officer, and it has to be approved by the drinking water officer. That's the process that we're going through right now. Once it is approved by the drinking water officer, going back to my earlier comments about the foundation of this whole process is based on collaboration. However, under the Drinking Water Protection Act and regulations, the drinking water officer, and Tim Adams is the drinking water officer for this area, does have authority and powers within the legislation that he has, that if he sees either an existing threat or a potential threat that to drinking water, that through the collaborative process, somebody, let's pick on the Ministry of Forest, pick on the Forest Service, they just simply say, oh, we don't have the money, or we don't think it's as bad as what we think it is. Ultimately, under the Drinking Water Protection Act, there is power for the drinking water officer to order. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's something that really hasn't been challenged because it's fairly new and there are other decision makers involved in the watershed, like Don has said. And those people are dealing with their own legislation. And I think if, by initiating this process, and if they're at the table talking to us, then we can deal with it at that level. But ultimately, if they decide, and through their own legislation as decision makers, to go ahead with something, then that's still a possibility. We're trying to work on that collaborative approach so we can circumvent that.
But there is a hammer ultimately if it had to be, but that's the court of last resort. It is collaboration, and where we've done some of these plans elsewhere, ultimately we've had actually terrific collaboration by a forest company saying, well, I've got a piece of equipment that's going to be up in the watershed, you know, if you need it for a couple of hours or whatever, I can make it available. And the rancher whose cattle are up there said, well, I can put in some fence posts or whatever, and the range department says, well, we've got some wire, and so that's how these things get done, and we've had really good success that way. Because by and large, whether it is a government agency, a stakeholder, there is this memorandum of agreement between the 7 ministries that have legislation that relates to drinking water protection, and the deputy ministers have signed that memorandum of agreement that says that they will make sure that their legislation is applied appropriately to protect drinking water. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it was more just to raise it.
Yeah. Yours word. Well, if you want to take a further look at the storyboards, and if you have any further questions, we're here for that hour. Another hour and a half. Here's all that.
Yeah. So I just want to remind everybody, well, first of all, thanks for coming, everybody. That when you arrived, we had handouts for everybody. One of them was the feedback form. And so the purpose of this open house is, one, to share information and to, give an update on where we are in the development of this plan. And two is to seek your feedback. We wanted, if you have any comments or questions or anything that you want to add, for consideration into this plan, feel free. And so you can do that by filling out the feedback form that was available up front. It's also available online at scre.ca. So just wanted to let everybody know that's available. So thank you.
And I was also negligent in identifying a few key people that are here as well. We have Tim Adams, who's the drinking water officer for the region. We have our chair of the board, Yuri Nor, who's the director representing Seashell, Durham Louis, representing the director representing the Seashell Game Band, and Monty, engineering technician, who is part of the group. And we also have Beth Brooks, who's our environmental technician at the SRE. And actually Dave Lasser, who's also part of the technical working group representing community forest. Thanks. And Vince Verlan, our facilitator.
So
Culver Associates with HB Lanner.